Welcome to Unlock the Healing Path with me, Natasha Hornedo. Sometimes emotional wounds manifest like the ground falling out from under you. Other times, it's a slow descent into a dull, stagnant place. Whatever your pain may look like, it's hard to think about healing when putting one foot in front of the other seems impossible. This show is about discovering the powerful healing tools you have right at your fingertips. This is a call to action. The world is demanding that we heal ourselves fully and truly learn to love and accept ourselves just as we are. Learn how to unlock your healing path and start moving forward through grief with grace. Watch yourself continue to grow, expand, and truly live the life you are meant to live. One that is filled with joy, radiance, and abundance. Unlock the Healing Path starts now. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Natasha Hornedo, and you are listening live to Unlock the Healing Path, moving forward through grief with grace on Transformation Talk Radio. Stay tuned with me today for the next hour as I talk here with my guest, Joshua Berry, about what ancestral healing is and what role it plays in our journey to wholeness, why we all need ancestral healing, and how you can get started with this work today. Then every second and fourth Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Central, 3 p.m. Eastern on Transformation Talk Radio, I'm going to have some of the most heart-centered and knowledgeable practitioners helping you to heal and transform your life. Hello and welcome to Joshua Berry, my beloved and an amazing healer and practitioner who has influenced my own personal journey and work so much. I am so excited and honored to have you here with me today. And I would just love to dive in. Maybe first
Sure.
we can just have you give a little background for our listeners. I know you very well, but I am so excited to get to share you with my listeners and just a bigger audience. And yeah, so can you tell our listeners a little bit about who Joshua J. Berry is? What's your story and how you first came to healing and what led to this this interest in the ancestral healing?
Sure. Well, I'll try to sum it up as quick as possible. You know, my dad introduced me to just kind of the spirit world when I was very young, and we lived on a commune for a little bit. Um, when I was probably 1 or 2 years old, and so that kind of just gave me a taste of, um, the spirit world, spirits and energy, and just being, at that point when I was little, I would just talk to my dad about, ghosts and things like that. Um, but then, as I grew up and got into high school and all of that, I really loved music and art and things like that. And I never really was interested in like a career, so to speak. People would always ask me what I want to do when I grow up, and I was like, I don't know. And so, my 20s was a little challenging because I was just trying to survive and be creative, which meant a lot of um, all kinds of work, labor work, and carpentry, and painting, and landscaping, and whatever jobs I could get, all kinds of things. And so I was a little depressed, probably through my mid 20s. I started to realize like I didn't want to do what I was doing, basically working really hard during the day and then trying to do like the things I like at night or on the weekends. And so I started to realize like there was a whole lot of stuff I needed to deal with. And My brother also at this time was in the throes of kind of a mental health breakdown. He was later diagnosed with schizophrenia and killed himself probably 2005, so about 15, 16 years ago. But like at that point, I just knew I wanted to do something different and I wanted to really contribute to the world. And I just really didn't feel like I was doing that at all. I was just, you know, a cog in the machine kind of thing. And a few things happened. I started to get, you know, kind of health issues. I had eczema and I hurt my back, and kind of all these things happened that forced me to just stop. And I wouldn't, you know, I couldn't work and I couldn't do all these things. And that's the first time I went to a body worker when I had injured my low back. And at that point, you know, I had done a lot of, I was doing capoeira and I was doing yoga and I was interested in um, just, I was starting to dive into all of that stuff. But the injury really kind of made me see that like there's a whole lot that I wasn't looking at. So that body work was the first time that I really got an inclination of like, oh, this is really something and I should do this. And so I really just wanted to understand more about myself, really. The injury made me realize like I just didn't, I thought I knew myself pretty well. I thought I was healthy. I thought I took care of myself, you know, all these things. And it made clear that I didn't. I really didn't know how to take care of myself. And I really didn't know about my inner landscape, you know, like how to deal with my emotions and how to express them or really just feel them at that point. And so that kind of pushed me. And years later, a couple years later, I started massage school because I was interested in healing, just like this big umbrella of healing. But massage school was like, okay, that's a door I know how to walk through. Like that's, I didn't quite know how to get to the other layers, but I was like, I can do this. I can start this. You know, this is something that I know will give me access to this world and also allow me to work and allow me to help other people. And
Yeah.
so,
And I feel that there's a lot of practitioners and just people in general that it's kind of the same. They come into that doorway through massage or yoga or movement practices
right.
because they start to see where it's like, oh, we're working with the body, but they get the sense and the feeling that there's something deeper and they're not necessarily sure how to get there, but these practices kind of provide this portal and this doorway to open the
Yeah. And
gates.
that was clear. It was very clear, like, this is the doorway to go through now. And it was, you know, like, I think probably the strongest impetus I had in my life that like I really needed to put all my effort into doing this. And everything
Mhm.
else kind of just was like, that's not important right now. Like, do this thing. You need to do it now, regardless of whatever, you know, issues and problems you run up against, just do it. And so that's where my journey began, or I guess I would say it kind of picked back up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, when was the moment that you started to kind of tune in to the ancestral healing aspect? Like what did that look like? What were some of the teachers that you
Um,
encountered?
well, you know, I was always aware of just like when I was in high school and when I was young, like early teens, I used to listen to music from everywhere. I used to listen to Buddhist monks chanting. I used to listen to a lot of Afro Caribbean music and Afro Cuban music and Brazilian music. And, you know, a lot of the Caribbean music, they will talk about the Orishas or they'll talk about the saints that are the secretized Orishas. And so I was always aware that, like, there's this whole other world out there. And so that just kind of led me to look in and read a lot about Buddhism and Tantra and yoga and et cetera, et cetera. And, but at some point, especially with my brother, Duncan, like I knew at that point that, like, you know, the Western medical system said he's schizophrenic, da 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 da, this is his diagnosis. But I knew on a deeper level, there was something else going on. It wasn't just that he's got some problems with his brain and it manifests in these certain behaviors. I knew, you know, there's a whole lot happening here underneath the surface. And even at that point, I was probably late 20s, 28 or something, I was like, I knew there's people out there that could help him, but I didn't know any shamans. I didn't really have a computer. The internet wasn't like it is now, where you can just look somebody up and, there's a website and you can go to Peru and, book a retreat or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And so that's when it started. That was the beginning of it starting. And after massage school, I started to actually do some ancestral uh, communication practices, which is basically just honoring my ancestors and like trying to find out. I set up an altar, and every week I would just call out all the names of the ancestors I knew and send them energy and basically be like, I honor you. I know you're here. I want to communicate with you, and, like, start to do the work. And then I had some experiences within about a year after that that was really like, oh, okay, this stuff actually really works, and it's really powerful. And it also is, as I became clear, understanding more about who my brother was and talking to my dad about his history and these kind of signs that come up over the years, and looking at my whole life in relation to my family, to my relationship with my parents and my relationship with my brother, and all the issues I had kind of been aware of for a long time, but didn't really dive into. It didn't really be like, okay, how am I really um, going to deal with these feelings I have, the anger, the resentment, this, that, and the other thing, and also be clear about like, am I really going to continue on these patterns, or am I going to change? Am I going to change the ancestral patterns, the trauma that was very clearly um, a part of, me growing up, and probably a part of a lot of families out there. You know what I mean? It's like
Yeah, I was
everyone's
going to
got a
say that.
trauma.
Yes, exactly that I am very 100% sure that all of us can relate to the family dynamics that happen and how that affects us. And it's like, does that open up that curiosity of like, oh, well, maybe that's something to look at. Maybe that's where the healing is.
Yeah.
And so we are going to take a quick break. You are listening to Unlock the Healing Path, moving forward through grief with grace with me, Natasha Hornedo. Before we take off on our break, I just want to make sure that you know how to contact both myself and Joshua if this is resonating and you'd like to know how to work with us or learn more. So, Joshua, can you please share your website?
Sure. It's Joshua J. Berry. So that's BE, two R's, Y, healingarts.com. So Joshua J. Berry, healingarts.com is how to reach me. And you can contact me through there, email, phone, all of that good stuff.
And beautiful. And you can reach me at natashaodnedo.com. We're going to take a quick break, and then we come back. We're going to keep talking about this topic of ancestral healing, and we're going to start to talk a little bit about what it looks like to create that altar and start to get in touch with your own ancestors. We're back on Unlock the Healing Path, moving forward through grief with grace with me, your host, Natasha Hornedo. And today we're here talking with Joshua Berry about ancestral healing. And so when we left off, we were talking a little bit, Josh, about how you first really started to get into that connection with the ancestors. And so you mentioned that you set up an altar and you just really started kind of calling out the ancestors that you were familiar with, and that kind of opened the door. So I'd love if you could share with our listeners today, maybe just a little advice on like, what would that look like if they wanted to start this practice today, if they wanted to start connecting, what would you recommend?
Well, first thing I did is just talk to my family, which is, kind of notoriously not communicative about much of anything. And so I just kind of, I was like, I know like my grandparents and a few other people, and that's like five, relatives of mine that had passed. And so, I talked to my mom and I talked to my dad, and I probably called like my aunt and a few other people, just to be like, what can I learn? First, it was just an interest. And I talked to my, you know, my parents and the few family members I knew that would tell me anything about anybody, where they're from and, how did they get here and so on and so forth. And, and then from there,
So
um,
just it sounds
yeah,
then initially that first step then was just through the living relatives that you had and communicating with them, you just started to open that doorway to just act like connect
yeah,
with the ancestors on that level. Yeah.
yeah. It's like I just showed an interest and I wanted to know more. It's like, how did we, I grew up in Connecticut, but my grandmother and my grandparents, they met in New York. So like, how did they get there? But my grandmother's from Lithuania, so it's kind of like, oh, okay, just got interested. And I read about, Ifa, which is a West African religion, spiritual practice, who, you know, they work with the Orishas, but a lot of what I've, come in contact with African based spiritual practices and just a lot of land indigenous based practices is they deal with their ancestors. They deal with, you know, everyone who came before them because they recognize and they honor that all their ancestors that came before them are still here and willing to communicate and pass the information on. In this culture, Western culture, especially, me coming from a European background in America, which is pretty much like forgotten a lot of the roots. Um, it's like we just don't have rituals. We don't have that kind of, at least not in my family, we don't have that
Mhm.
continuation and honoring. And so, yeah, the interest was first and foremost, but on a more practical level, um, set up an altar, real simple stuff. Um, make a ritual out of it.
And so when you say set up an altar, like, so if someone's listening to this right now and they're thinking like, oh, that sounds good. How do I do that? What would you recommend that they
Yeah.
start off with? Yeah.
Um, First, like depending on your living situation, like if you're sharing a house and you have a bedroom, um, make a space in your bedroom. And I know a lot of people say don't do that, but it's like you got to make space where you can. Some people make it outside, um, but for what I've found is most people, from a practical standpoint, they can deal with it better if it's inside. And if you have a house and you have a yard and it's temperate all year round and you're willing to go out there, make it outside. But otherwise, get a space, create a space, even if it's a corner of your room, and clean it up. Commit that space to be the altar full time. So it may be, like a little bench or a table, but, create a little space. Real essential is some kind of offering, usually water in a clear glass. Um, I like to use grain alcohol to feed my ancestors, which is a whole kind of different level. But, if you want to offer food, or if some aspect, maybe a grandfather really liked black coffee, or your grandmother really liked rum, or specific kind of candy or cookies, put those out there and keep it fresh, keep the water fresh. you know um, Flowers, something that honors that space and kind of beautifies it. It's
Mhm.
like fresh flowers, um, a candle, that kind of lights the doorway. It illuminates the doorway because, in my understanding, the ancestors are there and they're just waiting for you to communicate with them. So just start, like white candle. A lot of traditions use white candles. Um, but, a candle, get a
Mhm.
candle. You can get them at any dollar store. Incense, or, Palo Santo, maybe some sage, something to purify the space, something
Okay.
to kind of cleanse the space. And then set some time away. A lot of people, if they use a table, they put a cloth down. Again, a lot of people use white. Um, depends on the tradition and specifics, but like any cloth that appeals to you, keep your intuition open. And like once you set the intention to do this, you'll see the things you need. You'll see the things you're like, oh, I'm going to put that on my altar. Maybe it's like something from your family that was passed down, or I use a stopwatch or a pocket watch my grandfather had. you know I have a harmonica my brother used to have on there. So as you go through it, you'll get more. But create the space, set the stage, and then make a commitment to sit once a week. So like try to keep it consistent at the same time. I know life can be challenging, but it's like any kind of practice. If you make a commitment, it could be 10 minutes, but you say like Mondays at 7, I sit and I honor my ancestors. And so,
Yeah.
you know, the, f-
So what it
yeah,
sounds like here then is that, so if someone, let's say, and they're living in their room and they're like, this sounds good, I want to set up an altar. So like maybe just even on that windowsill, and just like
yeah,
bare bones minimum of like
yeah,
connecting in with the elements, some water,
yeah,
candle for the fire, incense for the air, and then something maybe that represents the earth, whatever that might be. And so, really quick, for those of you that are actually watching us on the video or catching us on a replay on YouTube, I actually sat today in front of my altar. And so, you can kind of see a little bit of what it looks like here. Granted, this is a more elaborate setup that has been created over years, and it still varies depending on things, but it sounds like it's really the most important of like where that connection comes from, like really starting to also, put forth food that maybe the ancestors were drawn to. And also, another thing I would say is that if you don't know exactly what your ancestors might have been drawn to, but you know where they're from and what the culture is, you could also make traditional dishes from your cultures, from where your ancestry is, and put that forth.
yeah, exactly. And if you talk to your living relatives, I guarantee people are going to start telling you things about your ancestors. Like, oh, your grandfather used to love black coffee. He used to love fried eggs, whatever it is. So, like, just take those cues and make it yours, do whatever feels right and good to you. But once you've set that up and you've cleared the space, then you create a ritual at it. So, you light the candle, make a comfortable space to sit, whether that's on a chair, or on a cushion or on the floor, whatever it is. But sit, sit, like lying down, I would sit. Um,
Yeah, and I
and
love too that you really threw out there and shared about how, make a ritual of it. Um, Something that I have always felt strongly, and I know we've connected on this many times, especially through the ancestry thing, is that, ritual, like that, our spirit is looking for that. Our soul, if there's something about ritual that it's in our DNA. It's what connects us really to the ancestors in that way. But at
yeah,
the same time, it's like ritual doesn't have to be this complex thing. A
no,
ritual can literally be just like, oh, I'm going to come in, I'm going to sit in this space, and I'm just going to take a minute with intention to connect.
yeah. And exactly. And what I would say is speak out loud, you know, call your ancestors out loud. It doesn't have to be loud, but the power of the voice is energy. When you use your voice in that way, your intention is stronger. It's like you can think all day, but we all think thoughts all day. When you speak it, you put it out into the world. You send that energy out. So it's more powerful. And,
It's yeah, it's like that, like our words have power. It's that spell work.
yeah,
Beautiful. So thank you. So I am Natasha Hornedo, and you are listening to Unlock the Healing Path, moving forward through grief with grace. When we do come back, Joshua Berry is going to be talking to us a little bit more about the importance of ancestral healing, like why we need to do this work, what are going to be like, what is the shifts we might feel. And also we're going to start to talk a little bit about, on a larger scale, social justice and racism and how that comes into play, and how this work of ancestral healing is really super key to healing in that spectrum. And this is something that's so important in our world today. So absolutely stay tuned. We're going to get into some really juicy things and really start to help you learn how to reconnect with your roots. Stay tuned and we'll be right back. I'm here talking today with Joshua Berry. And before we dive in, Josh, can you just once again share your website in case folks would really love to connect with you and learn how they can work with you more one-on-one?
Sure. It's Joshua J. Berry, so BERRY, healingarts.com. Joshua J. Berry, healingarts.com.
Beautiful. And if you've been listening to me and I resonate and you'd like to speak to me more and learn how we can work together, you can reach me at natashahodnedo.com. And so, Josh, when we left off, we were talking a little bit about, starting to make that first connection, going into the ritual, creating the altar. And so, what I would love for you to share now is, you had mentioned earlier that when you started to do this work, you noticed shifts and change, like there was a
Yeah.
palatable shift. So, I would love to hear a little bit about that. And I would love for you to talk to our listeners today about, like, why should they do this work? Why is it important?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, as I did the work, and I was working probably I was full time doing massage at that point. Um, so as I did the work, I've always had a kind of, we'll say, tough relationship with my mom. And, I started really, all why I wanted to do this work in the first place was really take responsibility for my life and my role in, you know, creating any problems in my life, you know. So as I did this, what I noticed was, um, my mom actually started to be a little different. It was always kind of like a really antagonistic relationship. It was always kind of like I felt like I was 14 again, and it would be like, all right, mom, whatever, I gotta go. And so as I did more work, I just tried to stay open to like who she was, and the her life and her issues and how she got here, and like tried to give her space to change. What I mean? That was the big thing, was like, it's really easy to be like, um, aware of other people's, quote unquote issues, problems, etc. But as I did more of this work, I really tried to bring more curiosity into our relationship and just her ability to be who she wanted to be, and for me to honor that. And on some other like bigger notes, I had one very particular experience where I dreamt about my grandfather, who was somebody I grew up with, um, for quite a few years. We lived in the house with him after my grandmother died, and he was a real hard person to deal with. He didn't like black people, he didn't like Jewish people. He was pretty misogynistic. He was kind of half blind and half deaf, and was kind of a cranky old guy who just hung out the house and made us feel awful. And I had always really not harbored any love for him, you know. And part of what I was reading about with ancestral work is you have to deal with the ancestors you really don't want to, the ones you had problems with, the ones you don't like, you know. They're like, that's key, because once, again, this is my understanding, once you pass on, you're in spirit. And so they don't carry necessarily those same traits with them. They're the essence of who they are. And so I really took that to heart. And so my grandfather showed up one night in my dream, And, this was probably after about a year of doing this practice. And he said, you were talking about me, you're asking about me. And he was younger, and, he showed me around, and he had a house and a girlfriend. And, it was pretty normal. But in the dream, I realized, like, this is really important. And, I gave him a hug, and I woke up crying. I was bawling my eyes out. And, like, as I woke up, I just realized, like, my whole feeling towards him had shifted. I wasn't angry with him anymore. And I was just like, okay, this person was in my life to teach me about dealing with difficult people, dealing with people you don't really like, that, you have a hard time finding anything that you could say good about. You know what I mean? But also, he is part of me. It's like healing is all, it's like our ancestors are part of us. The parts we like, the parts we don't like. It's all there, and it all needs healing. So it's like you can't bypass the things you don't like about your family or yourself, because then you're not really recognizing yourself as a whole, and you're not recognizing the continuity and the challenges that your ancestors faced to get here. And so that was a huge turning point with me, and it totally shifted how I felt about my family. My story shifted and changed, and it was no longer "Oh, my grandfather was a grumpy old bastard and blah blah blah." It just, like, that story wasn't relevant anymore. And
Yeah. And so I really love that you share this, because I know that's something that, once again, I know we like bond and we've connected over this, but that has very much been my experience, is that, working myself with the ancestral healing and going into that work, I have seen it transform the relationship with my family in ways that I could have
yeah,
never anticipated. And just like, I've seen them grow so much, and it's just kind of this ripple effect that you're like, oh, wow, that actually really does something. I get chills as I like
yeah,
talk about that. And so, what I want to dive into a little bit more and touch upon, especially, I love that you shared specifically about this instance with your grandfather, because you talked about, like, he didn't like Black people, he didn't like Jewish people. There's a lot of racism, there's that misogyny, there's all these things, which are these big topics that are coming up in society as a whole right now. And also the polarity of how these are characteristics and values that are like so against who you are as a person. And so I want you to start speaking to that a little bit, in terms of, like, what is that correlation with that ancestral healing, this like social justice and peace, this
sure.
racial justice piece. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah.
important.
So, I'm going to mention, one of my teachers is Malidoma Somé, Some. And I picked up a book by him years ago in Houston, waiting for a friend on a random, note.
Mhm.
And I picked up, this part of this book. It was Of Water and Spirit. And it was talking about, when we don't deal with the traumas of our ancestors, it's like the traumas will repeat themselves. And what he was talking about very specifically was, like, crime, or not crime, but like, you know murders and, like, sudden deaths of, like, traumatic nature, people getting shot. And he was talking specifically about in the US with Black folks and colored folks and brown folks and people that aren't white, and the trauma of slavery. And if you read his story, he was kidnapped by Jesuit priests and brought up to be a priest and taken away from his family, um, for like 15 years, until he was, I think, early 20s. And so his whole story is trauma itself. It's like he had his own trauma with, um, the Jesuits coming in to his, land, and taking kids away and basically brainwashing them. And so, like, when I read that, it just made a lot of sense. Um, that, and you can look in any direction or read any, psychology book, and know that, like, if you've gone through trauma, the likelihood that you will go through that trauma again, or maybe even inflict it on somebody else, is incredibly high, whether it's sexual abuse, whether it's, emotional, physical manipulation, um, whether it's alcoholism, it's like you name it. And so I did a lot of work with um, social activism in my 20s trying to figure out things. But what I realized was is I had to work on my own stuff. But as, someone from a European background and looking at all the things that have been going on, but is now really getting a spotlight with Black Lives Matter and, and even just all these movements related to it, recognizing the trauma of, what we've done in this country with the indigenous people who are here, or Brazil, or anywhere. It's a similar story. But as from my perspective of someone from a European background who probably had slave owners, or, like my grandfather, who was very racist, um, part of the work that I'm doing as dealing with my ancestors and honoring them is like I'm calling upon them to help me heal those traumas. And, it's like, yeah, of course, you look at all these police officers killing so many people, so many kids, so many women, just right and left. It's like we have to do the work. It's like we need to take responsibility for that history of this country and the trauma and the genocide that has happened here. It's like these things are coming up because they need to be addressed. And so this is one way that I
A
recognize.
hundred, 100%.
Yeah,
And the thing with this too is that it's that our ancestry, it's literally in our DNA, it's our genetic
yeah,
code. So we carry this, we move forward. And then we're about to take a quick break, but I just want to share this. I know we were talking a little bit about this last night, and I got really excited when you shared this because it just really opened my eyes and looking at things in this way. And also that connection of, like, even with your movement practices that you might already have in your life, if you're doing yoga or whatever movement practice that calls to you, that in itself, you said, could be that ancestral healing because it's more so about the intention
yeah,
of that movement. Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Barry. So before we take a break, I just want to remind everybody out there that support is out there for you. And if you're ready and willing to take that first step to make a change, if what we are sharing and talking about is resonating, if it's bringing up some discomfort of some things around you that maybe you need to feel, if you're out there and you maybe want to be a white ally and you don't know how, like, this is a great way to start. So please contact us, reach out, take that first step. We're here, and there's so many practitioners, like, see who resonates, but like, take that step. And so if you want, if I resonate, if you want to reach out, you can reach me at natashahodnedo.com. Josh Berry, once again, can you please share your
Uh,
website?
Joshua J. Berry, Berry, healingarts.com.
Beautiful. And so we're going to take a quick break. And when we get back, Josh Berry is going to share with us an embodiment practice to help us start to tune in and connect with our ancestors right now. You're listening to Unlock the Healing Path, moving forward through grief with grace, with me, your host, Natasha Hornedo. I'm here today with Joshua Berry, and we are going to move into an embodiment practice. So I want to kind of just dive right in. So
Okay.
yeah, what are we doing today, Barry?
We're just going to do a little embodiment practice and just kind of connect with the elements of, nature and the earth and a little bit of our ancestors, and just kind of get in touch with our body and, what we might be feeling in this moment. So if you're ready.
Yep.
Okay. So let's just get into a nice, comfortable position. And if you're sitting on a pillow, you've got your legs crossed, totally fine. And if you're in a chair, just try to keep your feet flat on the ground. You want to feel a nice connection, solid connection with the earth. And just find a comfortable position. Let your arms maybe rest on your thighs. And if you're open to it, close your eyes. And as you close your eyes, just start to be aware of the sounds around you. Relaxing your body, hearing the sounds maybe outside your room or your house or your office. And then hearing the sounds within the space you're in. And start to pay attention to your breath. Breath coming in through your nose and out your nose. Feeling the breath move in and down. And I want you slowly to become aware of your forehead, the space between your eyes, and going through the skull and the bones. Come right into the center of your head, right into the seat of the brain. And picture maybe a little pearl, like a pearl from an oyster, a little bulb, maybe of white light, golden light, any color that calls to you. Maybe just feel that space. And then start to let that awareness expand, expanding out to the edges of the skull, letting your scalp relax, letting your forehead relax, letting your eyes relax, letting a little smile come across your mouth, letting your eyes soften, letting your cheeks and your jaw soften. Start to let that awareness, that light, traveling down through the neck, along the vertebrae, to the chest, relaxing the shoulders, relaxing all the way through the arms into the hands. Let that awareness come to rest in your heart, just to the left of the center of the chest, connecting in with your heart, connecting in with your heart beating, connecting into all of your ancestors' lives that came before you to create this being, this version of yourself. All of that DNA, all of those experiences, all of their successes and failures and their dreams and hopes, their mistakes, into this heart beating in your chest right at this moment. And honor them. Relaxing the heart, smiling to your heart, smiling to the line of ancestors who came before you for millennia. And with this awareness, start to let that energy travel down throughout the rib cage, along the spine, to the solar plexus, into the belly, space behind the navel. Connecting in right behind the navel, maybe slightly below, that umbilical cord that fed us all those memories and genetic structure from all of those who came before us. Slowly let the energy travel down into the internal organs, the sexual organs, into the hips. And let the energy split into two spheres of light going down through the hip sockets, through the thighs and the knees, through the shins and the feet. And we'll sink right down through the earth into the center of the earth, going through the layers of rocks and stones and soil, connecting right into the center the womb of the earth, the original mother. Feeling that softness, feeling that embrace from her, holding us, taking care of us. Feel that heart beating from the center of the earth. Feel the heart beating in your chest. Feel them sync up. Feeling the connection. Knowing that all is supported, no matter what. And once we've made that connection, start to come up through that fiery energy from the center of the earth, that lava energy, able to create stone and rock and land, able to wipe out land, that creative fire, able to create our life or anything, but also able to take out anything that is no longer necessary. Creative energy of fire, the cleansing, rejuvenative energy of fire. Gather that energy into that pearl or that light as we move up through the soil, that soil in which anything can grow, that soil from which plants, food, sustenance grows. Moving into the minerals of the soil, all the crystals and the metals and all the tools we use to make our computers and our cars and our phones, holding all this sacred knowledge, all this technology, all the stories of the history of the earth within these structures.
Thank you so much, Joshua Berry. I'm so sorry. Unfortunately, due to time, that is all we have for today.
Okay.
But thank you so much for this beautiful practice, for everything that you shared. I want to just tie up with an action step real quick, a journal prompt for those of you listening out there that I'd love for you to take for today about where in your lineage are there wounds to heal and gifts to reclaim? Where do who do you and your family lineage get to be when this healing work is done? And what does that feel like? Because I ask you, who do you get to become when you make space and release your grief? Thank you so much for tuning in to me today. Next week, I will have the amazing Z, aka Zahava Gris, the founder of Embody More Love, a spiritual kinky community for personal and cultural liberation, talking about grief rituals and how grief is the path to more aliveness. Have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here next time. Once again, you can reach Joshua at joshuajberryhealingarts.com or myself at natashahornedo.com. Thanks, and have a great week.
Natasha.
Thank you for listening to Unlock the Healing Path. The time to heal your trauma is now. Don't wait. Do it for yourself. Do it for the people you love. The world needs your light right now. And it's my passion and purpose to support everyone I can in healing their pain and trauma, to support you in continuing to grow, expand, and truly live the life that you are meant to live. One that is filled with joy, radiance, and abundance. I would love to have that increase in every day of your life through activation calls, through one-on-one coaching, and by reaching as many people as I can to share what I've learned.